Generally speaking, the overwhelming majority of movies follow a strict three-act structure, and rarely deviate from it. But sometimes, enterprising filmmakers decide to toy with audience expectations of narrative structure in playful, entertaining, weird, and just overall unexpected ways. And so, for better or worse, we were all left genuinely surprised when the movies in question came to an end. So with that in mind, I'm Gareth from WhatCulture.com, and here are 10 movies that totally surprised you when they ended. Number 10, Pulp Fiction. Pulp Fiction is a textbook example of a movie where, unless you're clock watching on an initial viewing, you probably have no damn idea when it's gonna wrap up. The narrative is presented as something of a jigsaw puzzle with sequences playing out of order. The diner scene, which famously bookends the movie, actually unfolds in the story's chronological middle. And so, when the film abruptly cuts to black after Jules and Vincent leave the diner with Marcellus Wallace's briefcase, it provides a genuine jolt to the unsuspecting viewer. Given that Vincent hasn't died at this point in time yet, we're expecting some sort of wraparound epilogue to tie everything together. But Tarantino instead leaves it all jumbled for the viewer to figure out for themselves. It's a brilliant flourish, of course, and one of the film's most distinctive elements, as was so shamelessly ripped off by a glut of Tarantino imitators in the years that followed. Can't blame him for trying though, eh? Number 9, Monty Python and the Holy Grail. Monty Python and the Holy Grail ends abruptly in a wholly different manner, when just as the British knights mount up to reclaim Castle from the French, a group of modern-day police officers show up to arrest Arthur and his cohorts for allegedly murdering an historian killed earlier in the film. At that moment, one of the cops places their hand over the camera and prematurely ends the film, robbing the audience of the climax they expected to see. In this case, it's obviously played wildly for laughs, and though the Python crew did originally plan a more elaborate battle scene for their ending, they ultimately settled on this intentional anti-climax because it was both cheaper and funnier. And all things considered, they're probably not wrong, are they? If the cornerstone of comedy is the element of surprise, then this literal cop-out ending was most certainly a job well done. Number 8, True Lies. As James Cameron just proved once again in Avatar: The Way of Water, he is the crowned king of the third act. And though Cameron also proved himself to be a master of the extended finale way back in Aliens, audiences still likely didn't expect his 1994 action comedy True Lies to wrap up when it did, for good reason. At almost exactly the 2-hour mark, spy Harry Tasker saves his wife Helen and ensures the bad guy's nuke detonates safely on a remote island. But because that's apparently not enough for Cameron, Harry then learns that his daughter Dana has been kidnapped by the still-at-large terrorist Salim Abu Aziz. And so the movie continues for an extra 20 minutes as Harry steals a Harrier jet, rescues Dana, and wrecks the remaining terrorists. It's a fun sequence that culminates in one of the greatest one-liners in action film history, but also arguably a case of climax fatigue, given how tacked on this second-third act feels when the audience was just about ready to go home. Aziz and the other terrorists could have easily just been killed by the nuke on the island and saved everybody 20 minutes. But as we all know, Cameron doesn't do anything the quick and easy way, does he? Number 7, 3 Billboards Outside Ebbing, Missouri. The Oscar-winning masterpiece 3 Billboards Outside Ebbing, Missouri is the dictionary definition of a movie that leaves the audience wanting more. A whole other act of the story, in fact. Martin McDonagh's delicious black comedy ends in rather unexpected fashion, with Mildred Hayes and Officer Dixon forming an uneasy alliance as they hit the road to track down and possibly kill a man they believe to be a rapist. It's a wonderfully ambiguous ending given that the man in question categorically didn't rape and kill Mildred's daughter, Angela, but was overheard bragging about raping another girl in a bar. More so, Mildred and Dixon aren't sure precisely what they're going to do once they find the perp, with Mildred finally adding that they can decide on the way. Another filmmaker might have cooked up a whole other half hour of the story where the pair find the guy, beat him senseless, and ultimately decide to let him live, offering up a rather pat, tidy, even cliche commentary on cycles of violence and revenge. But McDonagh knows better and just suddenly kills his movie off out of nowhere instead, leaving the audience to stew on how the story continues in their own minds. As much as ambiguous endings can be supremely annoying, in this case McDonagh was surely aware that the reality would never be as tantalizing as the unanswered mysteries both of who killed Angela and what the pair did when they found their man. Number 6, The Batman. If you didn't go into Matt Reeves' The Batman knowing that it was just a few minutes shy of 3 hours long, you probably quite reasonably assumed that it was gearing to wrap up with Edward Nashton, aka the Riddler's arrest. But the film continues for another 45 minutes as the Riddler unveils his true plan: to flood Gotham City and use his legion of followers to assassinate Mayor-elect Bella Royale. While the flood would have served as a pretty tantalizing cliffhanger setup for the inevitable sequel, a whole other set piece takes place where Batman and Catwoman foil the Riddler's plan to kill Royale. Thematically, it absolutely serves a purpose in showing how Batman has transitioned into a symbol of hope for Gotham citizens. But given the lengthiness of the action scene and subsequent epilogue in which the Riddler meets the Joker, you can't really blame people for accusing it of having Return of the King syndrome. But more on that movie later. Number 5, Memento. Christopher Nolan's Memento is a downright ingenious thriller touting a tricky yet fascinatingly satisfying narrative structure that makes Pulp Fiction seem positively straightforward by comparison. The film alternates between black and white and colour sequences, the former moving forward in time while the latter move backwards, until they finally meet in the middle of the story at the end of the film, tying everything together. And though by this point we have all the context we need to understand that Leonard Shelby used his own amnesia to frame Teddy for his wife's murder, on its own terms it's still such an odd, unconventional and unexpected stopping point for the story. As Lenny pulls up in front of the tattoo parlor to have Teddy's license plate tattooed, he asks, "Where was I?" And Nolan suddenly cuts to black. A pitch-perfect ending that brilliantly bottles the temporal disorientation of the entire story. Even if you could see what Nolan was going for building up to this moment, it still caught just about everybody off guard. Number 4, Casino Royale. Add Casino Royale to the pile of blockbusters that seem to be categorically wrapping up, only to carry on for an extended additional climax. Literally a whole half hour before the end of the movie, primary villain Le Chiffre is killed, after which Bond retires from MI6 and jets off to Venice with Vesper Lynd. That's quite a typical, respectable ending for a Bond movie, right? Except rather than roll the triumphant credits, director Martin Campbell has an additional set piece in the bank, as Bond believes Vesper has betrayed him, only for her to be kidnapped and eventually drown. At this point, 007 returns to service and tracks down the man behind it all, Mr. White, before shooting him in the leg and finally dropping the iconic quip, "Bond, James Bond." Honestly, most of that final stretch could have easily served as the pre-title sequence for Quantum of Solace instead, giving it the propulsive opening it lacked in actuality, and ensuring Casino Royale's finale didn't feel a little over-egged. It's still a strong ending for sure, but absolutely not where anyone expected things to go once Le Chiffre got shot in the head 20 minutes prior. Number 3, Room. In the case of 2015's Oscar-winning drama Room, you can really attribute the audience's surprise at where it ended to how the movie was marketed. The trailers focus largely on Joy attempting to escape the man who has held her and her young son Jack captive for years, and suggested the post-escape portion would entail just a small section of the third act. But as it turns out, Joy and Jack spend less than half the movie in captivity, and the final hour plus of the film explores them attempting to readjust to the outside world, or in Jack's case, experience it for the first time. It's easy to see how another version of the film would have played up the grim confinement story, and put little pay to what happens next. But of course, real-life trauma isn't merely resolved the moment the traumatic scenario ends. By digging deep into the difficult experience of returning to normal life, Room becomes something as profound as it is unexpected. Number 2, No Country for Old Men. No Country for Old Men's sudden ending doesn't sit well with everyone, but didn't stop it winning the Best Oscar Picture, and damn straight. For the first 95 minutes of the Coen brothers' mesmerizing western thriller, it seems like a sure thing that our hero, Llewellyn Moss, will prevail against the Terminator-like hitman Anton Chigurh in the climax. But instead, Moss is suddenly killed off-screen by a group of Mexicans before any such showdown can take place, seemingly leaving Sheriff Ed Tom Bell to take his place in the quest to end Chigurh once and for all. But this also never happens. Instead, Chigurh kills Moss's wife, Carla Jean, as he promised he would, survives a brutal car crash, and then escapes to parts unknown. As for Bell, knowing he's absolutely outclassed by Chigurh, and tired of the whole mess, he basically gives up and accepts retirement, ending the film with a chilling recount of 2 eerie dreams he had, seemingly signaling his own failings and impending mortality. And just then, the Coens cut to black. The end. A less scrupulous pair of filmmakers would have likely changed Cormac McCarthy's source material to end with the aged sheriff taking down his much younger foe. But instead, they wrapped it on a brilliantly savage ellipses, so perfectly encapsulating the film's title and themes. That is how it's done. Number 1, The Lord of the Rings: Return of the King. Is there any better choice for a #1 slot than the film that obliterated bladders the world over 20 years ago? The concluding entry in Peter Jackson's Lord of the Rings trilogy is famous for having a basically parodic number of endings. Even the 201-minute original theatrical release felt like it was done 4 or 5 times before the end credits actually rolled. Enough that if you saw the film in cinemas back in 2003, you probably recall the hilarious sight of large groups of the audience getting up and sitting back down several times in a row, desperate for this behemoth to end so they could go to the toilet. After a while, it feels like Jackson can do this all day. So when the film finally actually ends on the shot of Sam's Hobbit house, it's a genuine surprise to see the words "the end" flash up. And given that J.R.R. Tolkien's novel somehow has even more endings, even fans of the source material weren't quite sure where Jackson would decide to cut things off. The epic tale is absolutely worthy of such an elongated series of endings, even if it perhaps didn't feel like it with a bladder full of coke at the time of its original release. I was there, my bladder never forgot, it never forgot. And that's our list. Know of any other movies that totally surprised you when they ended? Let us know all about them in the comment section right down below, and do not forget to like, share, and click on that subscribe button while you're at it. Also, if you like this kind of thing, then head on over to whatculture.com and find some more fantastic articles just like the one this video you're watching right now is based on. I've been Gareth from whatculture.com. Thank you very much for watching this video today. Bye bye.